Good evening, dear students. Today we will continue part 2 of synopsis from the subject oral and maxillofacial surgery. So today we are going to continue yesterday's live session topics. So today we will start with orthognathic. We'll start with orthognathic and pre-prosthetic surgeries. Okay, we'll start with orthognathic pre-prosthetic surgeries. We will discuss about management of cysts and tumors, managements of cysts and tumors, and then we will study about cleft lip and cleft palate. We'll study about local anesthesia and few medical emergencies. So these are the contents that we are going to discuss in today's live session. So first of all, orthognathic surgery and pre-prosthetic surgeries. So first of all, when it comes to the point of orthognathic surgeries, what is the meaning of orthognathic surgeries is that, so when patient is having a profile like this, patient is having a profile like this is a class 1 profile. There are few patients which we see with few conditions. Prognathic maxilla. So there may be a prognathic maxilla. Okay. There may be a prognathic mandible. There may be a prognathic mandible. There may be retrognathic maxilla. There may be retrognathic mandible. And there is other condition also like vertical maxillary axis. So there may be other condition also, vertical maxillary axis. So when do we find prognathic maxilla? In skeletal class 2 cases. In skeletal class 2 cases. When do we find prognathic mandible? In skeletal class 3 cases. When do we find retrognathic maxilla, means backwardly positioned maxilla? This also in skeletal class 3. When do we find retrognathic mandible? In skeletal class 2. So retrognathic mandible, prognathic maxilla are the components of skeletal class 2. And prognathic mandible, retrognathic maxilla are the components of skeletal class 3 mal relationship. Vertical maxillary axis means whenever patient smiles, there is excessive amount of gingiva that is exposed. So these are our, if you feel these are our teeth. When there is smile, there is a smile like this. There is excessive amount of maxilla that is visible. Actually 2 to 3 mm of gum exposure is acceptable. But when there is vertical maxillary axis, this is vertical maxillary axis, there is severe gummy smile. So for all these cases, we prefer orthognathic surgeries. When do we prefer orthognathic surgery is a very important point, dear students. You should know all the orthognathic surgeries are done after growth. You should confirm that there is no growth that is left behind. Then only we have to prefer orthognathic surgeries. Okay. If growth is present, we will deal the case as a myofunctional case or an orthopedic case. So that's a complete job of an orthodontist where he will be dealing with it. So only orthognathic surgeries are indicated only after the growth is being done. So now, how do we do? What are the different orthognathic surgeries that are available? So on regular basis, for the mandible, first we will learn about mandible. Whether it is a prognathic mandible or retrognathic mandible. Let me draw a mandible for you here. So this is the mandible. Okay, so this is the mandible. So whether it is, now the think that this is a retrognathic mandible. think that it is a retrognathic mandible and I want this mandible to come forward. Okay, I want this mandible to come forward. There is a famous surgery by Osbeker. So this scientist have given a surgery known as bilateral sagittal split osteotomy. So this bilateral sagittal split osteotomy, we will do a sagittal split like this and we will move this mandible forward. We will move this mandible forward and we will plate it in this way. Okay, we will plate it in this way so that your mandible is nicely advanced. This procedure is known as BSSO advancement. This BSSO advancement is indicated in patients with retrognathic mandible. So dear students, retrognathic mandible. This is retrognathic mandible, sorry. So this is retrognathic mandible. In retrognathic mandible, we will consider BSSO advancement. Bilateral sagittal split osteotomy advancement. So now there is a case with prognathic mandible. That means the mandible is too forwardly placed. The mandible is forwardly placed in class 3 skeletal cases. Prognathic mandible is there. Now what we have to do? Again the bilateral sagittal split osteotomy is done and it is set back. The chunk of bone is removed and the mandible is set back. This is known as bilateral sagittal split osteotomy setback. BSSO setback. BSSO setback is considered in prognathic mandible skeletal class 3 cases. So BSSO setback. You have a high chance of getting a clinical based questions on these. That's why I'm explaining what is the condition, what is your diagnosis, whether it's a skeletal class 2 or class 3, and what is your treatment option for orthognathic surgery that is available. Now, so we are studied about BSSO for the mandible. There is something known as vertical sagittal split osteotomy also, but we don't consider vertical sagittal split in usual cases. Mostly we will go with bilateral sagittal split osteotomy for mandibular surgeries. So there is some other surgery also, that is genioplasties. Advancement genioplasty or augmentation genioplasties can be done to make your chin to look more forward or more prominent. If at all the patient is having prominent chin, reduction genioplasties can be done. We will shave the the bone here. Okay, and then it is known as genioplasty. We are reshaping there. So that is known as genioplasty. Reduction genioplasty is done in class 3 cases with prominent chin. So that is reduction genioplasty, augmentation genioplasty, BSSO setback and BSSO advancement. So these are the mandibular surgeries. Hope that is clear. So mandibular, prognathic mandible, BSSO setback, retrognathic mandible, BSSO advancement. Okay, now let us learn about the maxilla. So what happens in maxilla? Prognathic maxilla is there. We will do Lefort 1 osteotomy. So just above the root apices of the maxilla, we will give a horizontal Lefort 1 cut or osteotomy. Lefort 1 osteotomies are done. So this Lefort 1 osteotomy will enable us to move the maxilla in whichever direction we wanted it to move. So if it is prognathic maxilla, we want it to be going back. So we will do Lefort 1 osteotomy and set back. And then if it is like retrognathic maxilla, we will advance Lefort 1 osteotomy with advancement. That's it. And these are the sagittal problems, antero-posterior discrepancies. When it comes to the vertical maxillary axis, same Lefort 1 is done and your superior impaction. We will impact the maxilla in a superior direction so that the vertical maxillary axis is decreased. Okay, so these are various surgical approaches that are done under orthognathic surgeries. So we learned what are the different orthognathic surgeries. So before we perform orthognathic surgery, we do several cephalometric analysis, mock surgery to confirm the output of the surgery, how it has to be. Okay. So when it comes to the mock surgery, when we are doing mock surgery, we will on an articulator, we will mold our maxillary and mandibular denture bases. So we will mold our maxillary and mandibular denture bases on an articulator. Okay. And we will create an occlusal splint. So this occlusal splint, so if for example there is a class 2 case, so for example there is a class 2 case with retrognathic mandible. Now what we do in mock surgery is we will make this bilateral sagittal split osteotomy and we will bring the mandible into class 1. Then we will record the occlusion of this class 1 relationship and we will fabricate an occlusal splint. This occlusal splint will act as a surgical splint that will guide us on the table of surgery. So when after finishing the surgery, we will insert this splint in the patient mouth and we will check the occlusion whether that splint is fitting properly or not. So this mock surgery will help us to actually prepare the surgical guide, that splint, so that we can check whether we have attained a perfect occlusion or not on the operation table. So these are the mock surgeries that has been done. So various cephalometric analysis also will be considered for before our orthognathic surgery. So this is about orthognathic surgeries. When it comes to pre-prosthetic surgeries, there are many soft tissue, hard tissue, minor remodelings can be done, but mostly we will do alveoloplasty. So there is something known as alveoloplasty. This alveoloplasty is done when the patient is completely edentulous and we want to go for a complete denture. So we want to take up the case for a CD, and there are the maxillary and mandibular jaws. So there may be any bony spicules, sharp points. So we need to remodel the entire bony contours so that the denture fitting is proper and painless. If there is any high point, any bony spicule, sharp edges, abnormal contours of the alveolar bone, all these will cause the ill-fitting dentures and there is a high pressure that is exerted on that particular point. So we will do alveoloplasty in those cases. Nicely, if you think this is the jaw, we will nicely give a midline incision. If you think this is a maxilla. Okay, this is the maxillary alveolar bone. So this is your edentulous maxillary bone. So now what we do on this alveolar bone, we will give a midline incision. We will elevate the flap on either side. We will remove the periosteum on either side, flaps on either side, and we will with a bone file, bone Roentgen, we will file the entire bone nicely so that no excessive contours or no excessive bony spicules are there, and then we will suture it back. We will suture both the flaps back. We will see for 1 week to 10 days, all the contours and healing should be fine, and then we will remove the sutures. So this procedure is known as alveoloplasty. This is the most common pre-prosthetic surgery that is done in the oral and maxillofacial surgery. So this is about your orthognathic and pre-prosthetic surgeries. Now coming to the management of cysts and tumors. So first of all, what is a cyst? This is cyst is a fluid filled cavity. Okay, cyst is a fluid filled cavity with a definitive lining. Okay, so now there are various procedures to treat these cysts. Okay, so the first and foremost procedure that is common for most of the less aggressive cysts are marsupialization. What is marsupialization? Creating a pouch. So we will create a surgical window like this. Okay, we'll create a surgical window like this and we will drain all the contents. We will evacuate, we will decompress all the contents of the cystic cavity. So this evacuation of the entire cystic contents is known as marsupialization. Okay, this process is known as marsupialization. When is this marsupialization indicated? When is it indicated means if there is any nearby vital structure, if you completely remove the cyst, you may damage the adjacent vital structures, or there is a lot of destruction that happens to the alveolar bone or the adjacent structures. In such cases, we will go with marsupialization. So this is marsupialization, draining the cystic contents or decompression of the cystic lesion by creating a surgical window is known as marsupialization. Now, what is something known as enucleation? What is enucleation? Enucleation means, if you think this is the cyst, okay, this is the cyst and this is cystic lining. If you think that is the cyst and this is the cystic lining, and this is all cystic contents. Enucleation means removing entire cyst with its cystic lining. You have to place your instrument like this without disturbing the cystic lining, without breaking the cystic lining. We have to remove the entire cyst along with the lining. This is known as enucleation. We are removing the entire cyst out, including the cystic lining, and we are not breaking the cystic lining. Nicely, we are removing entire cyst along with its lining. This is known as enucleation. So this is something known as enucleation. So in few cases, initially they will do marsupialization. After 6 to 8 months or 6 to 10 months, they will do enucleation. Why is this two-step procedure done? Because there is a chance, if marsupialization is done, there is a chance we will leave some remnants. So that remnants may cause again recurrence. So that is one case we will go with enucleation again. And few big cystic lesions, we don't want such big lesion to come out at once. We can't make such big lesions to come out at once. We want the cystic lesion size to decrease and the contents to go out. That's why we will do marsupialization first. And then we will do enucleation. So the cystic contents and the cyst size will decrease so that we can remove that small size without causing damage to the adjacent structures. So that is enucleation. First marsupialization, then enucleation. There is something known as curettage. After enucleation also, we will remove some healthy bone. We will remove some healthy adjacent bone to make sure that we are not left with any of the remnants of the cyst or the tumor. We will do curettage. So this curettage is done in order to make sure that we are not leaving any unhealthy tissue, and we are also removing 2 to 3 mm of healthy tissue. Scraping is also done. So the entire region is completely sterile. So that is curettage. Okay. So now there is something known as, there are few conditions to enlist. So these are like marsupialization, enucleation, curettage. Now, when it comes to the cases of tumors, there are some aggressive benign tumors, metastatic tumors. When it comes to the point of tumors, what happens is the treatment will be either partial resection or en bloc resection. So we can do partial resection or en bloc resection, means the complete tumor is excised along with, for example, this is the tumor. We will remove a bit circumferential healthy bone to ensure that we are on a safer hands. So that is partial or en bloc resection. In few aggressive tumors, we have to go with complete resection followed by reconstruction. So what are the cases we do? Enucleation plus curettage. What are the tumors we do enucleation plus curettage? Like odontogenic keratosis. What are the cases we do only en bloc resection? Benign tumors. Benign, non-aggressive. So benign, non-aggressive tumors, all benign, non-aggressive tumors, we go with en bloc or partial resections. For complete resection and reconstruction to be considered, we have to have a malignant aggressive tumors. So if the patient is having like osteosarcoma, chondrosarcoma, so all these are malignant aggressive tumors, we will go for complete resection and reconstruction. So this is the these are the various procedures in the management of the cysts and tumors, and these are the various conditions where we go with enucleation, with curettage, en bloc, and complete resections. Please do read the examples for all these, which are very important. Now we are done with management of cysts and tumors. Now let us discuss about cleft lip and palate. So cleft lip and cleft palate. Right from our first year BDS till our final year BDS, we are actually reading about cleft lip and palate in some or other way. So let us try to understand first the embryological aspect. Okay, the embryological aspect of cleft lip and palate. What happens is that this is your medial nasal process. These are your lateral nasal process. These are your eyes. This is your upper lip. This is your face. Alright. So, this is medial nasal process. Initially there will be two medial nasal processes. The two medial nasal processes fuse in the center or the midline to form a single medial nasal process. Then on the either side there will be lateral nasal processes. These lateral nasal processes forms the aloe of the nose. Okay. So this is the lateral nasal process which is forming the aloe of the nose, and this is the medial nasal prominence, and this is the maxillary prominence. So now the point is fusion of median nasal process with maxillary process. Fusion of medial nasal process with maxillary process will give rise to upper lip formation. Okay. Now, coming to the palate. So, this is your primary palate. These are your secondary palate. The two shells of the secondary palate will nicely fuse to form a secondary palate. And in due course, the primary palate fuses with the secondary palate. So, complete palate is formed like this. In case primary palate and secondary palate are fused to form your complete palate. So, if cleft lip has to occur, there should be some malunion between median nasal prominence with maxillary process. This is your upper lip. If there is a problem in fusion of median nasal process with the maxillary process, then you can see cleft lip. When do we see cleft palate is there is an abnormality in fusion of primary palate with the secondary palate. Then we can see cleft palate. So that is the embryology behind cleft lip and palate. Hope you all have understood. Now, so there are various etiological factors like genetical or any drug induced or stress, anything smoking, all there are very variety of etiologies, but the management is what you have to concentrate. Everybody knows Millard rule of 10. I need not to again discuss Millard rule of 10. Something I would like to discuss now is that you all should know, that is from the birth, how do you manage a cleft? Whoever is preparing for INI CET, so they have high chances of getting questions like this. Cleft lip and palate management from the birth till the orthognathic surgery. After growth. Orthognathic surgery after growth means the patient is adult now. So patient is adult. So from birth, how do you manage cleft lip and palate till the adulthood? So initially at the time of birth, there is something known as infant orthopedics. So this infant orthopedics is something which we do to reduce the severity of the cleft that have been occurred during the birth. So under infant orthopedics, we do naso-alveolar molding. So we do a therapy called as naso-alveolar molding. What is naso-alveolar molding? This nasoalveolar molding, it's a therapy under infant orthopedics. We do use an acrylic appliance which actually molds the nasal septal cartilage, our alveolar process. It will approximate, it will create some pressure onto the developing cleft region, so that they are approximated, so that the severity of the cleft is reported to be less when the nasoalveolar molding is done. So they utilize the nasal septal cartilage and the young alveolar processes. They approximate the cleft so that the severity of the cleft is not worsened. So the first step is nasoalveolar molding immediately after the birth. So next what we have to do is that surgical repair of the lip, soft palate and hard palate. Why did I write soft palate first then hard palate? Because 5 to 6 months of age we can do lip surgeries. Soft palate also 6 months of age, but after 15 to 18 months, after 15 to 18 months of birth, we have to go with hard palate surgery. Okay, we have to go with hard palate surgery. Okay, so these are lip, soft palate and hard palate surgical timings. Now, patients may have the malocclusion. So, patient may mostly have a constricted maxilla due to the cleft in the maxilla, nasomaxillary complex. There is a restricted growth of the maxillary component. So that will result in constricted maxilla. So this has to be addressed by the orthodontist by expanding nicely. So this is done during growth period. So expansion of maxilla during growth period has to be done, and all the malocclusion has to be corrected. There may be a retrognathic maxilla also. So there is underdeveloped maxilla on a whole, whether it is transverse constriction or retrognathic maxilla. Because there is a cleft, the maxilla is affected and it is not growing properly. For retrognathic maxilla, during the growth period, we will give face mask or reversible headgear. Okay, so this is the step. So immediately after the birth, we are doing nasoalveolar molding. Then we will do some surgeries at the age of 6 months. You will do lip and soft palate. 15 to 18 months we will do hard palate. Then we will go with orthopedic therapies. And then if there is a prognathic mandible, we will give chin cup and malocclusion is treated. Then after growth, we will go with necessary orthognathic surgeries to correct excessive mandible or to correct the retrognathic maxilla if still the deficiency is there. In those cases, orthognathic surgeries are considered after growth. So these are the various procedures that will have to be, that you all should know in the matter of cleft lip and palate management. Okay, so you should also read about the classification, unilateral, bilateral, that Y-shaped classification. Just go with the classification in a glance. So this is about your cleft lip and palate. Now let us discuss about local anesthesia. So first of all, what is local anesthesia? What is local anesthesia? So this is a drug. Basically, local anesthesia is a drug which when given at the local region will anesthetize, or it will stop the impulses to propagate, so that in the local region it will affect. So this is local anesthesia. Loss of sensation in that particular region is what the drug local anesthesia is doing. How is it doing? Mechanism of action. Mechanism of action of local anesthesia. Dear students, we all know the nerve cell membrane. So what am I drawing? It's a nerve cell membrane. This is cell membrane. This is the inside the cell, and again you have a bilipid layer like this. We have a bilipid layer like this. So this is intracellular, this is extracellular. In between the bilipid, phosphobilipid layer, we have something known as voltage gated sodium channels. Through these voltage gated sodium channels, the extracellular sodium will enter into the enter into the intracellular space of the nerves. When the sodium is inside, the action potential is generated, depolarization action potential is generated, and then impulse is propagated. So the sensations or impulses are propagated only when the sodium comes in. What happens when we give a local anesthesia? Our local anesthesia will block this voltage gated sodium channel. So local anesthesia will come in and block the voltage gated sodium channel. So this blockade of voltage gated sodium channel on the bilipid layer will restrict the sodium to come in. If there is no sodium inside the cell, there is no impulse propagated, there is no action potential generated. There is no action potential that is generated. Thereby, there is no sensation. Okay. Now, so this is the mechanism of action. So we understood the mechanism of action. Now, what are the pharmacodynamics? Pharmacodynamics of local anesthesia. See, I said local anesthesia will lead to loss of sensation. So, for example, this is our nerve cell. This is our nerve cell. This is axon, and this is a myelinated nerve fiber. These are the myelinations. This is our axon. These are dendrites. Okay. So, for what scientists say is that, and you also should know, concept of critical length. Concept of critical length. So what is this concept of critical length? They say for local anesthesia to have its effect, you should give sufficient amount of anesthesia that should actually reach the length of 3 nodes of Ranvier. So it should be 1, 2 and 3 more. Okay. It should actually 1, 2 and 3. The anesthesia what we are giving, it should actually spread, or it should involve 3 consecutive nodes of Ranvier. Then only you will have a good amount of anesthetic effect that is appreciated by the patient. Okay. So this is known as concept of critical length. Whatever amount of anesthesia we are giving, it should actually have the potency to block 3 consecutive nodes of Ranvier. Okay. It even applies to this particular length even applies to the non-myelinated. I brought the myelinated nerve fiber. It applies even to the non-myelinated nerves also. Okay. So this is the concept of critical length. Now, whether it is a motor or sensory neuron, it will be blocked by our local anesthesia undoubtedly. Now coming to the pharmacokinetics. Okay. When it comes to the point of pharmacokinetics, there is increased blood supply. If there is increased blood supply, if there is increased blood flow in the region where we are injecting, there is decreased duration of action of local anesthesia. Decreased duration of action. Okay. Decreased duration of action. What happens if the blood supply is more? It will dilute the local anesthesia. The diffusion of local anesthesia will be more. So the duration of action also decreases because the local anesthesia availability is not there at that particular region because of excessive blood flow. So this is first point. Next point is protein binding capacity. So the protein binding capacity of our local anesthetics, the protein binding capacity or the characteristic feature which we have for all our local anesthetics, this is very important. This capability of protein binding increases the onset and duration of action. Onset and duration of action. Now, there is something known as pKa. So, the lesser the pKa, dissociation constant, more the duration and onset of action. So pKa is the dissociation constant. Weak or low pKa means weak bases. They are weak bases. Weak bases or low pKa drugs have high affinity for lipid bilayer, lipophilicity. I said no, nerve fiber is having a bilipid layer. Lipophilicity means low pKa drugs will love to reach the cell membrane with bilipid layers. So nicely they are absorbed and the availability they increases. The availability increases and the duration of action also increases because low pKa will have lipophilicity, attraction towards the bilipid layers. They are absorbed nicely and the availability increases, onset and duration thereby increases with low pKa. Then we will add something to our lidocaine or all our local anesthetics, that is epinephrine. This epinephrine is added to have effect of vasoconstriction in that particular region of local anesthesia where we are giving. We don't want so much of blood to gush in and disturb our anesthetic effect. So that's why this vasoconstrictor is added. So to decrease the bleeding at that particular region and increase the availability and duration of anesthetic effect. That's why this epinephrine is given in the composition of our local anesthesia. But what is the problem with this epinephrine? What is the problem with this epinephrine is patients under antidepressants. Patients under antidepressants will have, these patients under antidepressants will have high sensitivity. Okay, they have high sensitivity reactions to this epinephrine. This is one point in the drug interactions of local anesthesia. So antidepressant patients who are all on the antidepressants, they have high chances or high sensitivity to epinephrine. Now, I will write a statement. See, now what is the statement is, raise in blood pressure without tachycardia. This is the statement. Okay, in which situation this statement is true, I will tell you. So when the patient is under non-selective beta blockers, when the patient is under non-selective beta blockers and you have given an LA with epinephrine, this non-selective beta blockers will decrease the heart rate. This epinephrine will increase the blood pressure. So this is the condition where you will see raise in BP without tachycardia in patients with, in patients under non-selective beta blockers. They are given LA with epinephrine composition. When there is a patient, you have given LA with epinephrine composition and the patient is on non-selective beta blockers. The drug interaction here with epinephrine and non-selective beta blockers is, this non-selective beta blockers will decrease the heart rate. Your epinephrine will increase the blood pressure. So that will actually result in a condition where raise in blood pressure without tachycardia. So this is the important concept that you have to remember for your entrance point of view. If you have any doubts, you can mention in the comment section. I'll be clarifying it for you all. So now, these are the drug interactions. Bupivacaine is proved, okay, bupivacaine is proved to have a high potency compared to the prilocaine. They have low potency. And these lidocaine, prilocaine, bupivacaine, these are group B and group C pregnancy drugs. Means they are not so risky to be used in pregnancy. Like that, they are not so safe also. Actually, group A pregnancy drugs, in the classification of risk factors of pregnancy drugs, group A drugs, which are all coming under group A drugs, are safe during pregnancy. But group B and C are okay. They are not proven to be risk, or they are not, first of all, they are not proven to cause any risk, or they are not proven to be safe also. You can, in an emergency, you can use lidocaine, bupivacaine, prilocaine in cases of pregnancy. So these are considered as group B and C. Something known as group D and cross also in pregnancy drugs classification. Group D drugs are not safe to use in pregnancy. They are not safe. And then there is a cross in the classification of pregnancy drugs where they are strictly contraindicated. Our local anesthesias, what we are using, will come under group B and group C. Local anesthetic drugs, what we are using, are coming under group B and group C pregnancy drugs. So these are the few points that you have to remember. Pain, temperature, touch, pressure. So these are the sensations. They are first lost. Pain is on local anesthesia administration. Pain is first to lost and pressure is last to lost. So this is the order of loss of sensation, and the reverse will be the order of regaining of the sensation. Pain, temperature, touch, pressure. Now, the last aspect of our oral surgery synopsis, medical emergencies. So in medical emergencies, we will be discussing about first foremost syncope. Very commonly seen medical emergency in most of the cases is syncope. Then we will see about seizures. Then we will see about asthma. Then we will learn about angina pectoracis. Angina pectoracis. Next, we will see about adrenal insufficiency. Very important. Adrenal insufficiency. Then we will see about hypo and hyperglycemia. Hypo and hyperglycemia. Then we will see about hyperglycemia, hyperventilation. Hyperventilation. And then we will see cardiac arrest. So these are the most commonly, and there is something like aspiration or foreign body aspirations. Alright. So these are the few most commonly encountered medical emergencies in surgical conditions. So first we will read about syncope. What is syncope? A sudden loss of consciousness is syncope. Why it is happening? Under stress. When the patient is under severe stress, there is a surgery that is going to happen. So patient is having stress. Whenever there is stress, our body releases this epinephrine. What does this epinephrine do? This will act on skeletal muscles. Okay, beta receptors. Remember, very important. It will act on skeletal muscles, especially peripheral skeletal muscles, beta receptors. So what happens then? It causes vasodilation. It causes vasodilation. Under stress, epinephrine is released. This epinephrine will act on beta receptors of peripheral skeletal muscles that will cause vasodilation. This vasodilation will cause decrease in peripheral vascular resistance. So there is good vasodilation and there is pooling of the blood in the peripheries. Entire peripheries are pooled with the blood. So decreased peripheral vascular resistance due to vasodilation. So the central circulation is decreased. There is decreased venous return. Entire blood is pooled in the peripheries. Decreased venous return. Decreased venous return, decreased cardiac output. Decreased cardiac output will lead to decreased or deficient blood supply to our cerebrum or brain. When there is no sufficient blood to the brain, patient will suddenly get into a state of unconsciousness and they will fall down. So this is the pathophysiology underlying the syncope. Okay, dear students. Now how do you address syncope is that it is a simple procedure. There is no much complications involved in the syncope. You should stop the procedure, whatever you're doing, remove all the instruments out from the surgical site, make the patient lie backwards with the lower body in a higher position compared to the upper body. Let the legs be placed superior position. So this is known as Trendelenburg position. This will ensure the peripheries blood to come back to the central circulation. So within no time the patient will come back to the consciousness. If the patient is not coming back to the consciousness after the Trendelenburg position, then you have to give some aromatic spirit. So by smelling that spirit, the patient may have the respiratory stimulus. This aromatic spirit will act as a respiratory stimulant. So this is how we can manage syncope. So this is about syncope. Now coming to the seizures. Seizures, stress is the unavoidable, stress will definitely cause seizures. In most of the patients, stress is an unavoidable precipitant of the seizures. So if there is a stress to the patient because of the surgery that is going to happen, or during the surgery, if the stress levels are more, it will result in the seizures. How do you manage the seizures is very important. So seizures as such is not very dangerous, but the complications because of seizures are very dangerous. It is self-injurious. When there is aggressive movements by the patient in the seizures attack, we need to first control the patient aggressive movements. We need to hold the patient tightly. Before you control the patient movements, make the patient turn to either sides so that the tongue will not block the respiratory or the posterior pharynx. So it will fall back and obstruct the posterior pharynx. So in order to prevent airway obstruction by the tongue, you make sure the patient falls on the side. He will be positioned on either side, not straight. So the first care is that. Second care is to control the patient movements. And if the patient is not back to the consciousness, then you have to give diazepam. Okay, diazepam will help you a lot. 10 to 20 mg of diazepam intravenous. If intravenous is not available, you can give an IM shot also. So this IV or IM diazepam will help you to manage the case with seizures. Okay, that is about seizures. Next, coming to asthma. In asthma, it is nothing but your bronchoconstriction. Most of the patient knows that they are asthmatic. They will be on some or other drugs. So schedule the appointments at the earliest in the early morning. And if the asthma has precipitated on chair, stop all the procedures and go with salbutamol. Salbutamol is a beautiful drug. It's a beta agonist. It's a beta 2 agonist. So this salbutamol will cause bronchodilation and the asthma should subside. If salbutamol is not working, salbutamol resistant or salbutamol unresponsive asthma can be addressed by higher group of drugs. After salbutamine will be your epinephrine. You can give epinephrine or hydrocortisone at the last stage. You can give hydrocortisone also to address asthma. So this is about it. Coming to angina pectoracis. Angina is pain. Pain in the myocardium. Why is this pain occurring in the myocardium or the heart? The angina pectoracis, why is it happening? Because due to decreased oxygen supply, due to decreased oxygen supply to the heart or myocardium, due to decreased oxygen supply to the heart or myocardium, under physical exertion, we require more oxygen. More oxygen demand is not met in angina pectoracis. So that ischemic attack. So that ischemia will result and there will be a severe pain. So that is about angina pectoracis. You can give nitroglycerin. So nitroglycerin is the drug of choice for angina pectoracis. This nitroglycerin is advised to give sublingually. So these are the aspects that you have to remember for angina pectoracis. Now coming to adrenal insufficiency. Very important, adrenal insufficiency. Please listen carefully. So what is adrenal insufficiency basically? Before I teach you about adrenal insufficiency, under normal physiological conditions in a healthy person. So in a healthy person, there is stress. For example, because of surgery or because of anything, in a healthy individual, if there is a stress will cause activation of hypothalamus. Hypothalamus will release corticotropic releasing hormone. Corticotropic releasing hormone will act on anterior pituitary. So this corticotropic releasing hormone will act on anterior pituitary. This anterior pituitary will secrete adrenocorticotropic hormone. This ACTH will act on adrenal gland, especially adrenal cortex, to release cortisol. This cortisol will reduce your stress. This is what usually happens under stress in a healthy person. Stress will lead to activation of hypothalamus. Hypothalamus will secrete corticotropic releasing hormone. This will act on anterior pituitary. Anterior pituitary will release ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone. This ACTH will act on adrenal cortex. This adrenal cortex will release cortisol. This cortisol will reduce the stress. This happens in a healthy physiologic state. But when the patient is on exogenous steroid therapy. What is the meaning of exogenous steroid therapy? He is taking some hydrocortisone or he is taking some corticosteroids, drugs externally. In such cases of exogenous steroid therapy, there is the decrease or decline of HPA axis. HPA axis means this only. Hypothalamus, anterior pituitary, P is anterior pituitary, adrenal cortex. Hypothalamus, anterior pituitary, adrenal cortex. HPA axis. This HPA axis will be suppressed. It will not function usually. So it is suppressed. So decreased cortisol. So there is adrenal insufficiency. Sufficient amount of adrenal secretions were not there under stress. That is resulting in adrenal insufficiency. Especially when the patient is on steroid therapy, there is suppression of hypothalamus, anterior pituitary, adrenal cortex, HPA axis. So in such cases, if stress is there, sufficient amount of adrenal secretions were not there to manage the stress. Such insufficiency is known as adrenal insufficiency. If you have a question or if you have a case that patient is on steroid therapy and there is a chance of patient is under stress, you should give, prior to the appointment, you should give hydrocortisone to the patient or any other corticosteroids to the patient should be given in order to meet this adrenal insufficiency that is expected. So they have to be supplemented with additional corticosteroids before the surgical procedures to overcome the adrenal insufficiency. Hope you have understood adrenal insufficiency. If you still have a doubt, you can mention on the comment section. Hypoglycemic or hyperglycemic is very they may go unconscious. So in hypoglycemia, you give your glucose supplements. In hyperglycemia, we will give our insulin supplements. Nothing much to discuss in this. Coming to the hyperventilation. What is hyperventilation? Excessive breathing. The breathing rate will be more due to anxiety or stress. Patient will have this type of action he will be doing in the site of surgery. There is excessive breathing and breathe out of the gaseous exchange will increase. In the due course, he will excessively expire or release carbon dioxide in these expirations. So becoming alkylosis. So we will get respiratory alkylosis. So this is something which is not actually good. because of excessive loss of carbon dioxide, we are getting respiratory alkalosis. So this is not the case where you supplement the patient with oxygen. This is a case where the breath out carbon dioxide has to be back into the body. What we will do, we will just give a paper bag to the patient. So that paper bag will collect the carbon dioxide what he is exhaling. The same carbon dioxide is inhaled back. In this way, you can get a state of equilibrium. So that is hyperventilation and its pathophysiology and its management. So that is hyperventilation. Coming to the foreign body aspiration. If there is a foreign body aspiration, the first and foremost thing that you have to do is that remove all the instruments or stop the surgical procedure right away and make the patient stand. Okay, if the patient is adult, make the patient stand and go for Heimlich procedures. Okay, you can stand behind the patient and give the xiphoid. At the xiphoid region, you can actually give the abdominal thrusts, so that this Heimlich procedure maneuver will help the patient to get back out the whatever aspiration is being there. So if it is a baby, you can give the back slaps. If this is the baby, you can hold the baby like this and you can actually give a back slap and spell out whatever that is being aspirated. Or else with instruments, if you have Megal's instrument,